Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we are in 2 Corinthians 11, getting closer to the end of 2 Corinthians. We will finish it up this week. Um, and then we'll hit a short little section in Acts and then go into Romans, and really dive into some deep theological stuff there. Romans is probably one of the deepest and more theological of all of Paul's writings. So, today, Paul, he's been talking about the false prophets and the claims that they around them and that stuff. And so here Paul talks about his many trials. So we're going to dive into this, look at the notes, and then finish this up. So 2 Corinthians 11, verses 16 through 33, he says, "Again, I say it, I don't think I am a fool to talk like this, but even if you do, listen to me as you would to a foolish person while I was boast a little." Man, I can't get that sentence out. "Such boasting is not from the Lord, but I am acting like a fool. And since others boast about their human achievements, I will too. After all, you think you are so wise, but you enjoy putting up with fools. You put up with it. You put up with it when someone enslaves you, takes everything you have, takes advantage of you, takes control of everything, and slaps you in the face. I'm ashamed to say that we've been too weak to do that. But whatever they dare to boast about, I am talking like a fool. Again, I dare to boast about it too. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I have served him far more. I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times uh, without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty, and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. Then, besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my feeling the weakness? Who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger? If I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is worthy of eternal praise, knows I am not lying. When I was in Damascus, the governor under King Aretas kept guards at the city gates to catch me. I had to be lowered in a basket through a window in the city wall to escape from him. And so Paul, kind of used a word play here and kind of plays the part, what he calls the part of a boastful fool, so that he can present his true credentials of a suffering prophet, right? Or a suffering apostle, right? These intruders or super apostles, as they called themselves before, um, they had an arrogant spirit, right? And so it adopt Paul, and so Paul decides to take. I'm going to take this same writing style, and I'm going to match their behavior in irony, right? Because they were talking about how awesome they were, how wonderful they were, and Paul's like, okay, and how weak Paul was. And so Paul's like, okay, yeah, I'm weak. This is how I'm weak, right? And he proves that he's not weak. He's on fire for the Lord, and he's doing some crazy awesome things for him, but he's suffering and paying for it. And while these other apostles were going around bragging about how awesome they weren't going through trials. They weren't going through any of these things. They were taking advantage. Like you see at the beginning of this section here, they were taking advantage of these people, and he's like, you're letting them take advantage of you. And so rather than boast about his strengths and success like the false teachers were, Paul boasts in his weakness and his defeat, right? The things that he's gone through, pointing away from himself and towards God, because he's like, look, these are the things that I've gone through. People wouldn't go around bragging about being beaten and getting 39 lashes 5 times. I mean, that would be horrible. And so he does that, and he uses this terms. Are they Hebrew? So am I, and Israelites. So am I. Are they descendants? And so Paul, like here, like he's ironically adopting the perspective of his opponents to beat them at their own game, right? He's just kind of saying, okay, yeah, I'm all these things too. You brag about being this, and so am I. And so he goes on to say, I've served them far more, and Paul's service to Christ. had entailed Christ-like sufferings and toils. I mean, you look at what Paul lists here of everything that he's gone through, and it's, not exactly like what everything Christ went through, right? Because Christ died on the cross, but man, he's gone through a lot. And so, you know, and most of these are recorded in Acts, or at least a lot of them are recorded in Acts. And so, he talks about being in prison more often. And we can look in Acts. Well, what we've read in Acts so far chronologically, right? We see that, right? Acts 16, we see that, and one of the writers, Clement of Rome, right? An external source writes about Paul, and he says that Paul was imprisoned a total of 7 times, in his journey and in his missionary before he passed away, and so he talks about receiving 39 lashes, and this was the punishment that was described in Deuteronomy 25. I think it's 1 through 3. And so the Jewish leaders punished Paul as a renegade Jew, and he faced death again and again. I mean, and these 39 lashes, right? This was not like just, man, it was brutal, right? And so it wasn't just, they got whipped 39 times, no big deal. No, it was rough. They had a cat of nine tails with glass and stone on the end of them, and they would hit him 39 times with that. It was bad, right? He was in prison more often. 3 times he was beaten with rods. Once he was stoned. We have that recorded, right? Where he was stoned at the city edge. They thought he was dead, right? And so then he walks back into town. And then 3 times he was shipwrecked. And so a lot of the shipwreck stuff's unknown. We do see the Paul in Acts 27. We'll get to that. We haven't gotten to that yet. Where Paul was shipwrecked on his voyage to Rome. That's going to come later. So, so more than likely he was going to be already shipwrecked 3 times. Going to be shipwrecked a 4th time. The 3 other times weren't recorded, but they're recorded here. So we believe what Paul's talking about. And so all of this with Paul is recorded in Acts 13 through 28, and we've read a lot of it already, right? And we're going to see more. And so these trips, right? They were dangerous, and he endured hardship all the way through it. And so not only his additional, not only these physical things that he had going on, right? He had all this physical stuff going on, but he felt the burden, and I would say the anxiety for all the churches, right? Things they were going through, falling away, his concern for them. He truly cared about this. And so there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of, emotional stuff that went along with this. And so, and then no church, right, gave Paul more cause for concern than Corinth. And as we can see with these letters, and we're going to see with the future letters, right, that he writes to other churches, like he doesn't have to deal with as much stuff as he has to deal with the church in Corinth. And so then he goes on to, as a final boast of his weakness, right? He tells the story of his escape from Damascus a few years after his conversion, and he has to be lowered down in a basket because the king here is, literally sets guards at the city gates to try to catch him. They want to try to catch him, and so it's like he has to be lowered down through a basket, and so he does all this, and he shows all this to prove it's like, look. All these other apostles who call themselves super apostles, who claimed that Paul wasn't really who he was, or wasn't what he really claimed to be, shows them like, hey, look at this, right? Yeah, they boast about how awesome and wonderful they are. I'm going to boast of my weakness, because my weakness, the things that, no one goes around and basically tries to boast about how much they've been, basically messed up, or how much they've had to go through here. This wasn't a sign of, oh, look how awesome it was. It's like, man, why you must be a fool because you're getting caught all the time. You're doing all this stuff. It's like, no, I'm doing what God called me to do, and I'm having to pay for it. And these other guys aren't. They're going around taking advantage of you. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing. They've kind of got you enslaved. He uses some of the terminology there, and you're just going along with it. He's like, you didn't see me do that. I'm not doing that. This is, and so he boasts in his weakness. And now we see that this is not weakness. We know that anyone to endure this kind of stuff takes a great amount of strength. But he goes to basically his whole idea, his whole thought is, I'm giving credit to God for this. Everything goes back to God. This is, I'm doing God's will. May God get the glory, not myself. And so that's what he's, and that's why he writes this, and that's why he pushes on this. And so tomorrow we're going to look. Paul now will transition from here into he receives a vision, and then it's a thorn in the flesh alongside of that. And so we'll talk about that. It's an interesting perspective. I've heard a lot of different. I've heard some lessons on this one, and I think maybe my perspective on this one might be a little bit different than what maybe some people have heard. I don't know. We'll see. At least it's different than what I've heard before. But we'll transition to that, and then we'll finish up this week, just a couple more days in Second Corinthians, and then we'll hit Acts, and then go into Paul's letter to the Romans, which is, like I said, very deep, very theological, and that's, we talk about the meat of the milk of the word and meat of the word. That's going to be the meat. And so, as always, I hope you all are enjoying these. I hope you're learning from them. I always encourage you to, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do that, because we're going to publish these daily until the end of the year, until we've gone through the whole New Testament in chronological order. And like I said, I hope y'all are enjoying these. As always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these and have been watching and commenting and asking questions. I love that. I love going even deeper when we can. And so, as always, I appreciate it, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.